Slurped it up, a little bit of cheeky apple juice there. How's it going, my G's? Hope you're all doing well. Today I'm going to do a video about layering drum and bass drums and my kind of little formula to keep things nice and simple and easy to understand, you know, when choosing the right sounds or ingredients. And that's why today I'm going to be comparing making a drum and bass beat, you know, with all its layers, to cooking and eating a beautiful chicken fajita, which also has a lot of different layers and a lot of different ingredients, but they all work together in a way that creates a beautiful experience. Wouldn't you agree? So let's jump into today's video, and I'm going to start off by grabbing some sort of fajita ingredients and discussing how we can use this analogy to help us understand the complexity or simplicity of the layers of a drum and bass beat. Let's get into it. So you can't actually make a fajita without the most important ingredient, which is the wrap that you're going to wrap it up in, right? And I've got a beautiful white fajita with some sort of seeds inside it. Looks very nice. And this is going to be what I would call the bed of the fajita and the bed of the drums. So the thing about drums is when you have like absolutely no sound in the background, or the drums are not sort of able to sit on something, like sit on a bed, they will sound a little bit unnatural. And if you're creating music in a digital software and there's just silence in the background, you know, that's essentially, you know, it's like a digital void of nothing, you know? But in the old days, I don't want to say old days, even now with recording bands and that, you have like the room sound always of the drums. There's like the, you know, the overhead mics, and there's like the kind of little reverb of the room. And that's often like a sort of background layer that everything sits on top of, you know? But another way that we can create a nice background sort of bed to start off the drum layering process is simply to use like some really subtle kind of white noise or vinyl crackle or something like this. So we're going to jump back into Logic and we're going to lay in a nice bed to start off the drum beat. So to create a nice little bed to start things off, I'm going to just use a little bit of sort of noise from Vital. We're going to have this very low in the mix and in the background. And I'm going to use the river setting here. So all I've done is I'm going to just draw in some MIDI, as I've done here. Just sort of, you know, one note held down. So it plays out the sample. And so I've got this kind of river sound. It's got a lot of sort of high-end texture. We're going to just take out the low end here. And now I'm just going to track an LFO to the level so we can give it a bit of a rhythm. So it almost becomes like a little hat loop. Now I'm going to really, really reverb the hell out of it, because the idea with a bed is something, you know, right at the back of the room. So really, really, you know, sitting, you know, behind everything. So for that, you know, the best way is to take out, you know, take out a lot of volume from the sound and also add in a lot of reverb. So let's mix in. Nice amount of reverb there. And then, you know, let's give it a little bit of filtering, a little bit more, maybe take out a tiny bit of high end. Okay, turn it down a little bit in the mix. And there we have our bed. And I'm going to go ahead and just bounce this out already. And then, hey presto, we have our first background sound, the fajita bed. So this is the bed, the wrap. Nice and simple. So let's move on to the next ingredient. So now that we've got our bed sorted, so we're not just in an empty room, you know, we've got something to start off with, I'm going to add in the most important ingredient, which is the chicken. And this is actually not real chicken, it's vegetarian chicken, but it tastes pretty good. I'm not a vegetarian, it's just what I happen to have in the fridge. Anyway, this is going to represent the kick drum, you know. I'm going to put 2 in here because we've got 2 little kick drums in our loop. But the reason why I want to emphasize the kick drum is the most important part is because in the whole mix down of a song, especially in drum and bass, in electronic music, everything bounces off of the kick, the whole track almost. So it's like the most important ingredient. It needs to be like really powerful and nice. It's a shame it's vegetarian, but it's a big, juicy, almost chicken kick nonetheless. So let's get a really nice kick drum loaded up in Logic. I'm looking for something with a nice transient on to fill out the high end, but I also want to make sure there's a nice punchy body underneath as well. So let's get back into Logic.
So I've chosen a kick drum from my sample pack, not because it's the best sample pack in the world and you have to buy it, although you probably should. But actually, it's just quite easy for me to know that I've got a nice kick that I can use in here. But let me show you on Span what it looks like and what I look for in a kick drum so you can better select one yourself. Here, we play it on our bed that we made before. So this is the chicken kick. And if you look on Span, what I'm sort of looking for, that low, punchy parts of the kick, which is not too short, so it doesn't have enough bass, but it's not too long, so it becomes like an 808 kind of bass line. And I'm also looking for a nice sort of filled out high end. I don't really want any holes in there that'll make it sound hollow, and I want a bit of brightness all the way up to the top. So this has that body, and it has that transient, and it has, the nice amount of brightness to it. So I'm going to stick with this one. And one way we could improve the layering already is we could perhaps sidechain our little bed a little bit. So what I'll do is I'll just add a very, very subtle sidechain movement to the bed. And I've got my LFO tool, which is a volume automation set up. So the default mode is already on a classic two-step kick sidechain. It takes out the volume of the kick on beat 1 and then on this kind of offbeat part here. And I can just mix in the volume so it doesn't take all of the sound out. But again, I'm really concerned with making sure the kick has, the full priority at that sort of time when it hits. So anyway, we've got our kick drum in now. Now we've got our bed. So the next thing would be the most important thing to add for me is going to be the snare. So can you guess what ingredient I'm going to use for the snare? The second most important ingredient in a fajita? Well, actually, I'm kind of doing a bit of a weird fajita, so bear with me. But it's a very important ingredient anyway. Let's get into it.
So one of the most important ingredients... One of the most important ingredients for me in fajitas is the guacamole, which is obviously made from avocado, right? And it's also one of my favourite fruits. I think it's a fruit. But in this case, because I wasn't really sure what to use as a snare, I thought I'm going to use the avocado as a snare drum and create some nice big chunks that we can put in the fajita instead of the guacamole. So we're going to skip the guacamole. We're just going to do chunky avocado in this fajita today. Anyway, I've got two beautiful snare drums which are going to be placed in between my kicks. But the important thing here when we talk about the layering is that they're also very, very punchy and they're very, very loud. But in comparison to the kick, they're not quite as powerful in the fact they don't have as much low end in, and therefore they're slightly less important than the kick drum, because the kick, is really driving the whole track, and the snare is going to be that sort of secondary, main rhythmic part, but it's a little bit less powerful than the kick drum. So it's going to be a little bit quieter by comparison as well, and it's not going to be so important to pay lots of attention to the low end of the snare, because as long as it has a nice punch, around it could be 200 hertz, anywhere up to 500 hertz, something like that. That's going to be really, really nice, but it's not going to really have that low impact that a kick does, So it's a secondary element, but the second most important punchy element. Anyway, let's go and find a nice snare that complements our kick.
So again, for this tutorial's sake and to make things a bit easier and quicker, I've just grabbed a snare from my sample pack as well. But what I want to talk about when you're choosing a snare to match your kick, if we play them together here, they kind of work together quite nicely in terms of their tone and in terms of their pitch, and it's important to note that each kick and snare, has its own pitch. But is it super, super important to have the exact right pitch with your track? Yes and no. I believe that the kick drum usually should be in the same root note as your sort of bass line, as the root of your track. I believe the snare drum you can have a little bit more room to experiment with, perhaps different pitches in the scale. But to be honest, from a personal standpoint, or how I personally go about it, is I purely just listen to the tone and try and imagine the feeling that the kick and snare create together, and if they kind of work together or not, and sometimes the pitch might be not exactly the root note, but it just kind of sounds nice together. So I prioritize the feeling of the tones of the two drum hits, rather than getting super scientific with the pitch. And yeah, so with our bed, our kick and our snare, I mentioned how the snare was sort of a secondary sound to the kick, and although it's sort of already loud, let's take it down a little bit on the mix here, -2 or something. You don't always have to do this. It's just, I want to just emphasize that it's a secondary kind of sound, and then we could, for example, on this, let's throw a transient shaper on just to shape the snare a little bit more, because I believe that it's a tiny bit long. So let's just bring down the sustain. Yeah, bit nice and tighter and snappier. And obviously you could do other things. You could layer in some more snares in the high end to provide even more harmonics and texture. But I'm talking about just the main ingredients for the fajita today. So now we have our avocado. Can I spell? Yeah, I think I can. We've got our avocado snare. And the next and third sort of most important element now that's going to keep, really drive the rhythm of the drums is going to be the hats. So we're going to add in a couple more ingredients into our fajita and talk about cymbals and hats now. Let's get into it.
So I've got some peppers and some onions here, and you might be thinking, are you going to cook those? And the answer is yes, but for the purposes of this demonstration, I need them raw. It's a little bit easier on the hands. What we're going to do with our hats then is I want to have one main hat loop that sort of anchors everything together. So, a nice straight hat loop. Something I used to miss in my old productions, and someone commented on a video on YouTube a long time ago, one of my songs, and said, you're missing that sort of eighth hat that ties everything together. And so this is going to be represented by the peppers. So I'm just going to have like sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, and then another 1, 2, 3, 4 to represent the sort of main anchoring hats, that will just tie everything together, like I said. Then I'm going to have the onions, which are a little bit smaller and a little bit more in the background. And these could be like our secondary hats. So perhaps we have a little offbeat hat or little faster ones in between the main ones. So we could perhaps get one main hat loop and then sort of a secondary one that sort of fills in the background and has a bit of a faster rhythm. So with this one, it's going to be a bit more chaotic because there's a bit more of them, but they're a bit sort of smaller and more in the background. They're not quite as big and crispy and chunky as the main pepper hats. So now we've got our main hats in there with some secondary hats. We've got our kick, we've got our snare, everything's sitting on a bed. So now we've got like the main kind of ingredients. So let's go ahead and quickly add in some hats that will fit to our kick and snare.
So I've started off the proceedings by getting a nice simple hat, and it's just a singular one shot. I'm looping it over and over again. It's kind of on a slow rhythm, so it's not, it's a little bit robotic, but it's because it's sort of going with the kick and snare, you don't really notice that sort of robotic feeling of it being the same sample, It's very sort of functional. Just it's that that the pepper hat that we wanted. So pepper hat, and yeah, the idea again here is to make sure we can layer it in with the kick and snare. So we might want to put it a little bit further into the background. So let's bring it down in volume a little bit. It's sitting quite nicely around there, and again, it may clash with the kick and snare in terms of the transient again, so we could just see if we need to soften it a little bit more. This one was already sort of in the right ballpark, it wasn't necessarily too harsh at the beginning, and you don't really need to sidechain it to the kick and snare. If the transient's soft enough, it's going to just gel together with the other sounds naturally anyway. So at that point, I quite like my pepper hat and my chicken kick and my avocado snare, my wrap bed. So let's add in the sort of the onions, which is the sort of secondary hats. I've got a couple of loops here, so let's see if we can pick one out. Yeah, I quite like these sort of flat hats. They're nice and sort of simple still, but they have a little bit of a faster rhythm on. So these could be representing the onions, perhaps. And let's just listen to those in the mix. And because they're even smaller than the main one, you know, let's really bring these down maybe to -5. And let's really give these a bit of transient shaping as well, a bit more, you know, softness here. Maybe even shorten the actual length of them as well on the sustain. A little bit less volume. So there we have it. We've got our onion hats, which are kind of the extra sort of little natural ones underneath our main sort of anchoring pepper hat. So now we've got the chicken snare, the wrap bed, the avocado snare, the pepper hat, blah, 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 blah. So the next thing to do is we could add in one more sort of character, one more main ingredient to sort of tie everything together a bit more. And this could be a bit of cheese, you know, a bit of cheesy rides. So let's get a bit of cheesy rides on, and then after that we'll do the post-processing and the extra colouring, the colouring of the fajita with some special sauces.
So I've gone ahead and cooked my onions and peppers, and that looks really nice, and I can't wait to eat it, but I've got to finish recording these videos. The last ingredient to add is going to be a bit of grated Gouda, and this is going to represent the ride symbols. And they are just going to add that little extra bit of brightness to the fajita. So let's get a bit of cheese on there. And what this is going to do, you can see it's almost like white noise, you know, because it's going to be filling out the high end of the frequency spectrum. You know, these really nice sort of splashy ride cymbals, and it's going to provide that extra bit of brightness. And what we can actually do in the course of a drum and bass beat and a loop, we can use like little moments of, you know, little splashes of rides to add a bit of brightness here and there in the drum beat, specifically to emphasize, you know, like the downbeat, or emphasize certain parts of the beat that you want to, you know, add in that little extra energy to. So let's go ahead one more time to add in another sample in Logic, and we're just going to pick out a nice clean ride with a nice bit of high end on, and just add it in a couple of points throughout the beat to provide that extra little sparkle.
So just to keep things nice and simple and easy for this demo, I've got a little cymbal sort of splash here, little ride hit, which you can hear on its own. So this is going to be our little extra bit of brightness and cheese. So this is the cheesy ride. If I can just name that quickly. Cheese ride. And yeah, just to keep things nice and simple, like the downbeat, you know, the start of the beat, you know, that's quite important to have a bit of impact and energy on. So I'm just going to keep one ride on the like sort of first downbeat on the kick here. So let's add it in with the drums. Just so it sort of fades off a bit nicer and doesn't sort of cut off, let's increase the length of that fade. And let's actually go ahead and push it back and give it a little bit of extra length as well in the whole mix, and give it a little touch of reverb as well here. Okay, so you can see, you know, it's got a lot of high end, this ride here. It's really, really up there. That's the cheesy brightness that we're after. I'm going to turn it down even more, so it's just a nice addition in the background, a little brightness boost. So that's the main essence and, you know, the important ingredients for me of a fajita, a drum and bass loop. So what we can go ahead and do is now is post-process it and add in some little extra sauces to sort of finish up the whole group. You know, we can put the sauces on everything, you know, as a group processing. But, you know, this is a very simple beat, of course, and there's loads of other sounds you could add in to make it more interesting. You know, extra snare hits, ghost kicks, obviously. You could add in like toms, cowbells, you name it, like any percussion instrument, so many, like bongos, whatever. So many other cool things you can do to like put into your beat to make it more unique and exciting. But these are like, for me, like the fundamental, like important layers that kind of work on the spectrum, work harmonically, you know, across the board, you know, always, you know. So these are like the sort of basic ingredients that I would always use in my chicken fajita. Anyway, Let's jump over one more time to finish off our fajita, and we're going to add in the extra special bonus sauces.
Now, usually, of course, with my fajita, I would have had 3 sauces, you know, the guacamole, but we used the avocado sort of raw. But the other 2 important sauces are the salsa and then some sour cream. So the salsa is going to be the distortion and the saturation that we're going to put on the whole drum groove and drum beat. So just to spice everything up a bit, you know, give a bit more push to everything, I'm going to layer some salsa over the whole lot of it here. And then, you know, now we've sort of distorted it up, brought everything up to speed. You know, we could colour the sound, we could do some more effects to it, but just to keep things nice and simple and easy and clean on your drum group, you know, you don't need to do a lot if you've chosen the right ingredients and got them at the right levels and volumes, you know, then you don't need to add too much. So a little bit of distortion, saturation, spiciness to sort of blend it together a bit. And then we're going to sort of cool things down a bit with the sour cream here. And this is going to represent just a little sort of mid-side EQ. So I'm just going to check the low end and check it's not like overly stereoed from any of the sounds that we've used have too much sort of rumble or you know, low end frequencies in the sides that we don't really need. So this is going to be, you know, representing my EQ here. So let's just add in sour cream, and then I'm going to have to just go ahead and eat this really quickly. But let's quickly do the post-processing on Logic. Then I'm going to tuck in.
So doing this as quickly as I can then so my fajita doesn't get too cold. I've grouped up the drums into a nice little bus here. We've got a camel crotch at the end, which is just clipping the audio to make sure nothing goes above 0. And so let's first add in our sort of saturation and distortion. So let's use the Wings Fire for the distortion, because I really like that it's multi-band and I can just drive, you know, the high part of the sound without affecting the kick. So I'm just going to select the multi-band here and drive it up a bit. Got it on the arctan mode, which is a sort of soft clipper here. And without it, you know, as it sort of brings up those details in the sound, it naturally sort of glues and gels everything together. And I don't have to use a compressor in this case because I'm not sort of trying to limit, I'm not sort of trying to weaken the sound. I'm trying to keep it at, you know, at a nice volume and use the way that I've played with the volumes of the different ingredients to create the dynamics, you know. And then the saturation is just boosting things a little bit more, you know, the little details. So that's the sort of spicy salsa that we've got. And then one last thing to do after that, we'll just throw on an EQ. I'll do a little mid-side EQ. So just on the sides, I'm just going to take out some of the low end here. You can see there's a slight bit of rumble, so we'll just take that out. Just clean things up a really, really small amount. But, you know, with the right sound selection, the right layering and the right volume, you know, we don't need to over-process things in the whole group here. So that's the basic fajita drums done. So let's finish off by actually eating this darn fajita, right?
Seriously, my G's, making this tutorial and filming it has just made me so hungry. So, and I've sort of overloaded this fajita, but I'm just gonna tuck in. Going to get a bit messy here. It's not even going to close. Whatever. I've been Artifact. I've been your fajita chicken, fajita host. Hope you've enjoyed today's video. Much love. Don't do anything I wouldn't. Oh, that is lush, my G's.
Too great.